Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. I haven't made a video in a while. I did posted some collaboration videos with a friend and fellow YouTuber a few months ago. I do have some videos I'm going to be posting on my recent trip to Europe last month, a trip I took to Memphis, Tennessee and some surrounding areas back in June. So this upcoming fall I will be posting some videos on some of my travels. But right now I'd like to talk a little bit about the passing of Queen Elizabeth II and what it means to me as an American. Of course, it is Sunday, September 18th. Tomorrow is the funeral. And of course, she passed away a week before last Thursday on September 8th. And there's a few things I want to address. Number one, why do we admire her, or why are people? Because a lot of people are asking, like, why are people making a big deal? You know, this is a kind of an outdated sort of tradition that is a product of a bygone era of imperialism and things like that. So I want to talk a little bit about why I think that she was a very admirable woman, specifically going back to her early days. She's old enough that, of course, she did serve in World War II. And a few other things I want to talk about is some of the features. It's really interesting to note that constitutional monarchies are really some of the most well-run, most stable countries in the world. And a lot of the countries in the world that don't have a constitutional monarchy, who are republics, are generally, like, pretty much all countries were kingdoms at one time. The ones that weren't generally had some kind of independence movement or revolution, which often was kind of violent and left a country with an almost like a dysfunctional kind of situation, whereas constitutional monarchies came about from slow negotiation away from the power of the royal family. And so talk a little bit about that. But these are all, and also talk a little bit about why, yes, about the relationship between British colonialism. So first of all, I am definitely a bit of an Anglophile. I did go travel around the UK for 2 weeks back in 2017, 4 days in London, 8 days traveling around on Brit Rail. About a total of like 13, 14 full days total. So, and I did go see the changing of the guard at Buckingham Palace. I did go tour the staterooms of Windsor Castle. So overall, it was a great trip, and I feel like it was a great thing to be able to do those things while Queen Elizabeth II was reigning. So, so that's so like I said, and I mean, to think that she was came to the throne at age 25 in 1952, to see all those changes during the time in the last 70 years. Now, a lot of people will say, well, what's the big deal? I mean, well, just because you're a figurehead, a ceremonial figurehead during that time, why should we be admiring that? Yeah, that alone is not. But I think countries really need something that is kind of a sense of stability and tradition, even with all the changes, even positive changes. For the U.S., it's something like the Constitution. Again, even if people don't really necessarily follow it, necessarily. I think that especially, I think, in a constitutional monarchy, having someone who is a figurehead, who is not elected, who has no real power, but also has all their needs completely taken care of, and whose service is nothing more to be the best representative of the country as it possibly can be. Someone who is meant to be a model of how all the rich and privileged should act in a country. So I think that's probably one of the biggest things. I think is that it really does. You need a role model that everyone loves. That should be the role model of how a wealthy and privileged family should act. Because you're always going to have wealthy and privileged people, but when they're kind of groomed, I guess, and raised to be the representation of the country, that's kind of, again, like I said, how I think all the wealthy and privileged should act. I remember seeing a interview with the actor Stephen Fry, who I love, a few years ago, and he explained, and he's a pretty liberal guy, but he is very British. I mean, he was a Shakespearean actor, and he was. But he talked a little bit about the purpose of the constitutional monarchy, the idea of having someone that, again, doesn't have any power, but is kind of somewhat universally loved or broadly loved, and can be a force of disapproval toward people in high positions like a prime minister. It's like that's if you let them down, if you disappoint the monarch, even though they can't really do much, I think that there is something that ought to be said there as far as I think a function. He stated that if we were to start a country from scratch, we wouldn't have that. But as it evolved over the centuries, from and the British really sort of had a way of dating back to the Magna Carta, of taking away some of the power from the royalty and balance between the nobility and the royalty, and that eventually kind of became kind of like a parliamentary system. And because like I said, I'll talk about this in a moment, but all the countries that are not constitutional monarchies had some kind of movement for independence, some kind of revolution, and those didn't always go so well. And in some ways, countries have never really quite recovered from the overthrowing of their monarchies in the early 20th century. Most notably, China, Russia, more recently, Iran. But going back to her early life, I think it's great that she was one of the last connections really to World War II. The only last public figure, I believe the last public figure that played any role in the war effort. Because again, anyone who had played any role in the war effort in the World War II would have to be over 90 years old at least today in 2020, and that would be pretty young. But she was a mechanic, she was a truck driver, so for royalty to do that, again, maybe it's just PR, but it's good PR, and the royal family had an option to be evacuated to Canada during the London Blitz in 1940. They chose not to, and she still took ration, like the food rationing in Britain that was going on in World War II, that was going on even a couple years after. And she paid for her wedding dress in 1947 with her ration books. And so, again, they didn't need to do that, but that's, I think, pretty remarkable. To me, I think that the passing of the last people that had played any role in pitching in the World War II effort, I think it's kind of a sad thing, because it's like we need those role models, and I kind of feel like the adults are gone, I guess, in a way. Because like my own grandparents' generation, were part of that. So anyway, but that's so going, and so I wanted to address again, talking, if you look at constitutional monarchies, all the well-loved countries among like those who are more liberal or left here in the U.S., that are admired for their social safety nets and their universal health care and so forth. Certainly, like the Nordic countries, the Scandinavian countries, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, they're kind of looked upon as like a model. They all got their royal families. Netherlands and Spain, and then Asia, some of the most well-loved countries and most politically stable and democratic countries, Thailand and Japan, are also constitutional monarchies. And like I said, it's interesting because like the countries that don't have, that are not constitutional monarchies, that are like republics, because all countries at one time were monarchies, the ones that are, you know, are not anymore, again, had some kind of independence movement or revolution that was very well quite bloody, and you know, where a country never quite really kind of recovered from, in the sense that they never became a country of you know, human rights and democracy and things like that. So so the U.S., I think, is, you know, really one of the few examples that really of a country that's you know, fought a war for independence and overthrew the monarchy, and really ended up creating something like a constitution. But you know, you look at countries, of course, like France and Germany. Both were countries that saw a collapse of their monarchies. France, of course, in the French Revolution, and then in with Germany, and with Kaiser Wilhelm abdicating at the end of World War I, which was like when a lot of monarchies all kind of collapsed. And in both, in the case of the French Revolution and in Germany, the country kind of descended into chaos, or you know, in the Weimar era with all that inflation going on in Germany, and then also the reign of terror with Robespierre and you know, the French Revolution. And then in both instances, a strong man came in to restore order and bring back stability. And in both cases, both of those leaders that came in became autocrats that started a whole war across Europe. Of course, in France, after the French Revolution, after 10 years, it was Napoleon. And I think we all know what happened in Germany in the 1930s. I don't think we need to really even mention or address that there. So obviously, certainly both countries, after completely hitting rock bottom and being defeated in both world wars, eventually, you know, experienced a new golden age, I guess, if you will, eventually. So certainly Germany became, you know, a prosperous, you know, peaceful democracy with global leadership, corporations, you know, car companies, what, you know, all that kind of thing. And then obviously France, you know, went through a burgeoning of the arts, you know, all the impressionism art and, you know, all that kind of stuff. So but, you know, then you look at China and Russia. They, you know, Russia had a little taste of democracy, I guess, when Gorbachev you know, essentially led to the collapse of the Soviet Union. But, you know, it's basically been autocratic the whole time, with, you know, terrible human rights violations, and the same thing with China, and you know, and then Iran. Again, all those countries essentially had monarchies that were overthrown and just had worse dictatorships. You know, whether it was Mao Zedong in China, whether it was Stalin in the Soviet Union, and of course still today they're kind of pretty low rankings, obviously, in terms of democracy. So whereas constitutional monarchies, they again slowly negotiated power away from the monarchies, little by little, through and then, you know, and so I think that there's really something to be said about that. Anyway, so that's something to really to point out, is that the countries that do have monarchies have them because there was the slow negotiating away of a power balance is much better than a country that really kind of had a revolution and then descended into anarchy, and then really led to dictatorships that were worse than what was there before. So now the other thing I want to address as well is the you know, what about the colonialism and imperialism? Doesn't she represent all that, you know, and the brutality associated with that? Well, it is true that during her reign, some of the movements for independence in Kenya and some other countries in Africa were indeed suppressed with military force. But for the most part, you know, there was a lot of instances of the graceful exiting and allowing of independence for many of the colonies. You know, it wasn't always the case, but she oversaw the, Britain basically said, yeah, you know what, yeah, we're don't really have a right to rule these colonies anymore. And a good example, of course, is Britain handing Hong Kong over to China in 1997. They kept their word that after the 99-year lease that they would be returning it. So, anyways, so that there was a sense of changing with the times. Again, even though she couldn't. They weren't supposed to, like, the royal family wasn't supposed to, like, get involved in politics, and some people say, well, they should have spoken up when when African countries were pushing for independence. But when they did, though, they also met with those leaders, and so I think that's the UK was during this time saw the progression from a highly more imperialistic country to one that was a bit more gracefully exited that. Like, again, unlike, say, Russia. I mean, see what's going on in Ukraine, and that's not the only instance. That's. But the point is, though, is that that they adapted to the times. Queen Elizabeth was there when homosexuality was finally decriminalized in 1967, and then she was there for the signing of marriage equality in 2013, and she remarked about how incredible this is. So, the idea that the royal family is completely this unchanging thing, that's not entirely true. And so, and it didn't matter whatever cultural change was going on, is that if they recognized that it was significant for their country, even if maybe that they weren't necessarily a big fan of it, they still recognized it. Like, I don't know if how much, to what extent that the royal family enjoyed rock music of the 60s, but she did give the Beatles the most excellent order of the British Empire in 1965, even though this was the young people's music that they were screaming fans, and but still, so, like, the idea that they were so, again, does this necessarily, like, justify or any of the bad things that the British Empire did, or that the royal family never spoke up against? Well, no, but again, when you really compare it to just, like, most other countries on the planet, you have again, especially the ones that did have some kind of overthrowing of the monarchy in the 20th century, or earlier in the case of France. It didn't really go so well. Again, the U.S. seemed to put together a pretty model constitution that a lot of countries had followed after their revolution in 1776, and then France and Germany, after their collapse and rise of an autocrat that started a war in Europe, those countries eventually also kind of went through a golden age of being kind of a world leader in the arts, or engineering and arts in the case of France, engineering in Germany. But again, a lot of countries, Russia, China, Iran, the dictatorship that replaced their monarchy was even more repressive. So, so that's why I kind of think that's important to have some understand that some traditions that may seem antiquated, that we may not fully understand, like, why do we even still have this? Is kind of like something to be kind of careful with what you wish for, because sometimes there's, like, a void, where there was something stable there. And I think that kind of the same thing can be said certainly for, like, major world religions as well. So anyways, I wanted to address that. So the key takeaways is that, so her early life that's represented making an effort to, be a common, person or contributing to the war effort. Talk about, of course, constitutional monarchies, and then so anyways, that's a little bit about what I have to say. So I hope you found that interesting, and It's something to think about. Anyways, thanks. Have a great day, and I will see you soon. Bye.